Iran continues to rage over last week's life sentencing in a Swedish court of a former Iranian prison supervisor over his role in mass executions in the late 1980s.
The punishment for crimes has been set to life imprisonment. The reason for that is that the accused is convicted of a crime where a very large number of people have been executed.
Iran's judiciary on Wednesday slammed the verdict, calling it illegal, and the ultra-conservative Kayhan newspaper called on the Islamic Republic to seek reprisal against European nationals currently in Iran. But for Iranians who were imprisoned under Hamid Noury's supervision, the ex-jailer's sentencing was anything but illegal. It came as a blessing.
I was so happy. I was so delighted because this is the first time in the history of Iran and the history of justice movement that we could bring, a guy who was involved in crime against humanity before the law, before the justice.
Both happy and sad. I was happy because the judicial standards in the world have progressed to prosecute a crime about 3 or 4 decades ago in another country, and sad because many of the mothers who are petitioning are not among us today, and my friends who sat in a same jail, in a bin, in some cells, unfortunately were executed in prison, are not among us.
Both Mesdaghi and Rezalou personally suffered at the hands of Nouri, who was arrested in 2019 when he arrived in Sweden to visit relatives. He was accused of murder for participating in Iran's infamous Death Committee, which oversaw the 1988 massacre of roughly 30,000 political prisoners. Back in August, i24NEWS spoke with both former prisoners as Nouri's trial began.
He was so rough and violent against the prisoners, especially women and children.
Rezalou was politically active at the time. She was only 14 years old when security forces came for her in June of 1984.
They sent me to a room, as a torture room, and they lied me to a board, a torture board, and blindfolded me and handcuffed me, and started to lashed under my feet, maybe every time more than 100 or 150.
Rezalou, who spoke from outside the courthouse in Stockholm, says she still can't walk properly due to the damage she suffered those days. Mesdaghi was also arrested for his political activity with the opposition.
During the massacre, also I had some contact with him. I had some. I met him several times in the death corridor. I saw that he himself, Hamid Noury, he was calling the name of prisoners who were sentenced to death. He put them in a queue, and he said that he sent them to the site of execution.
Mesdaghi was taken to Gohardasht prison in the city of Karaj, where he too was tortured.
Like others, I was tortured so savagely. Then for a long period, I was in a solitary confinement. Then they put me in a box, which they call a grave. I was blindfolded all the time.
Today, both Rezalou and Mesdaghi feel some form of closure, but the wound remains open.
The depth of the tragedy is deep. It's too deep and too big, and actually depends on an ideological system that is still committing crimes against my people in Iran.
Sitting on the same death committee was then Deputy Prosecutor of Tehran and current President of Iran, Ibrahim Raisi. And there are growing calls to prosecute him as well.
I think it is time, and it's very important now that Mr. Raisi is the president, that we start investigating what happened in 1988 and the role of individuals.
While this is a sentiment shared by both former prisoners, they are still pleased to see justice served, even at a lower level.
I'm not looking for revenge. I'm looking for justice. And I can say that this is the most important moment in the history of Iran. For the first time, we got the fruit of our effort.